let me just start by saying, who in the room knows the Institute of Customer Service? Fabulous. Who are members of the Institute of Customer Service? Even more fabulous. So it's great to see so many of you. And here are some examples of you sitting in this room. And forgive me if your logo isn't up there or part of that, but a really genuine warm welcome to our members, and it is great to see everybody here. Just so that you remember what we do for a living, because my mum asks me this frequently. So this is the purpose of the Institute. But in a nutshell, to help organisations, pan-sector organisations, to get better at customer service. And not because that's a nice thing to do, but because there's a genuine economic value, both in terms for you as organisations, for the employees that work for you, but also for the wider UK. And I think that is really important. And what you are doing is really, really important. And I'm going to come on to purpose and culture and helping us feel more connected to our purpose and culture. But essentially, we have over 450 organisations, 4,000 individual members, 80% of our members come from the private sectors and 20% from the public sector. And for our sins, we are also Secretariat of the All-Parliamentary Group on Customer Service, which is very interesting at the moment in terms of trying to get them really focused on some more important things other than the B word, which is obviously occupying everyone's aspect. Richard touched on this morning in terms of the fact that our customers, your customers, our customers, are touched by many different organisations and brands. And I think that is really important. That's reflected in the membership in terms of the broad range of organisations that are members of the Institute. Let's just touch on a little bit about the external world we're looking at. And for me, if you look at this, I think there's some really important, can you hear? Yeah, really important trends and things that are going on in the external world. And the reason why I put this slide up is that this impacts not just on our customers, but also on our employees. So the environment that we're in, the massive political uncertainty, the degree of regulatory scrutiny that you are under, and I can't see that diminishing, I can only see that increasing. That produces an additional challenge in terms of how we deliver to our businesses. How we deliver to our customers. How many of you, is going to be a bit of audience participation, have a shortage of skilled people inside your organisations? Okay, I certainly do. That's pretty good. Most of the times when I actually ask people this, they go, yeah, actually at least 3/4 of the people in the room are struggling with this. And actually last week or the week before, as part of National Customer Service Week, we launched a piece of research which was all about recruitment and retention. And if you haven't got a copy of that research, I would have a look at it. But 52% of the time we get recruitment wrong. Yeah, and that's a really big challenge inside our organisations. So there's a big piece for me about attracting and retaining the right people in our organisations. And other aspects, I'm sure this will come up today, personal data and privacy, all of the kind of issues that we're seeing in the external world around, Facebook, etc. So there's some interesting challenges that I think that are actually out there. And I notice, and I will pick up the point of about email, because we've certainly seen that in terms of more email traction across all sorts of industry sectors. Growing power of customers. So customers have less monies in their pockets, they're much more vocal, they're much more willing to tell you how they feel. And so all of this is going on. Does that have resonance for people? Yeah, is there anything in particular, shout out if there's anything in particular that you're really seeing as a challenge, particularly in this sector? Or is it, yes? Keeping up with expectations, yeah. And multiple expectations too, isn't it? And we're a bit more angry, aren't we? As a society, do people feel that? We're already going for a fight by the time they've actually gotten to your contact centre. So this challenging environment that we are living in. And I think that has got worse. In the 10 years that I've had the privilege of running the Institute, I think in more recent times, there are a lot more challenges that we're expecting our colleagues to enter into and to face off at as well, which is a challenge. And then if we look at customers, and actually I think we could put employees above this slide as well. So I think this is a really interesting thing here. We're all experiencing a much greater financial squeeze, yeah? Much more challenge. For the first time in one of the latest UK CSI, salaries and pay became a really big issue for people. And I think that is interesting when we are challenged in terms of what we're trying to pay. So there is a greater issue around the financial squeeze we as customers, but we as employees are also facing inside. And people moving, and we're seeing this, people will move for quite relatively small increases in pay in terms of contact centres. Yeah, much more pressure on that. We all want more experiences than stuff. We've got enough stuff, although I don't think I've ever got enough leather handbags, shoes or any other things, but certainly we're seeing that as a trend and having that the experience. Polarisation of attitudes and also wealth, so we've got much greater extremes. Yeah, in terms of, and you can see that really playing out. Instant gratification, I want it and I want it now. Yeah, both in terms from employees, that's certainly something that gets fed back to me, but also from our customer piece. Much more tech savvy and aware, and the reality is often our customers have better tech than our organisations do, and that ability to interact with that, and we can definitely see that. Increasing choice. So in our world, you know, there's something like, in 1952, 2 coffees sold in Sainsbury's. There's something like 152 now. So that whole kind of range about choice, I've got an awful lot increasing amount of choice. I want to touch a bit about this area about trust and reassurance too. Because with the onset, you know, much more about social peer-to-peer, who do I trust, where do I get my information from, fake news. You know, I am really looking for an organisation that I can trust and that makes me feel reassured. Now, I think that's a really important opportunity for this sector, because what you do really matters. And it really, you know, to be able to provide homes for people is a huge opportunity, I think, to really touch people and to build that level of trust. So I think that's an opportunity because it's a requirement too. I need to feel that I can really interact and trust, and it makes it more than a transaction. And I'm sure today we'll talk a lot about transactions, using tech to take the cost out, making sure that transactional stuff is dealt with by the technology, and I would agree. But actually the difference you can make is the human element of that, because you're building stronger relationships. So my biggest message probably that I would talk about today is anything that is what I would call services, not service, and I'll explain what I mean by the difference of that. Anything that services, so booking something, buying something, something that is transactional, the more that you can make that pain-free. This lady said that earlier about making it easy. Absolutely. One of the key things that comes out time and time again, make my life easy. Anything that you can do for those things, put the technology in, utilise that. Anything that I am unsure about, worried about, need to have a conversation, that is the opportunity to really make that sweet spot and make that massive difference. It's really interesting. I was looking at the UK CSI, this latest round of the UK CSI, and one of the questions that really stood out for me, buried in the data a little bit deeper, was what are the things that really increase customer satisfaction? What are the real things that can really touch me? And what was really clear is when an organisation does something that really matters to me and does it well. So my 91-year-old mum really does matter to me, okay? And she lives on her own, and I care deeply about my mum. So where an organisation really goes the extra mile for her, on my behalf or something, I'm really loyal to them. So let me give you a little example of that. I was going on holiday with my mum. She fell down the stairs. She had a pretty bad injury, so we had to cancel the holiday. I had a letter from the insurance company that wrote, here's your cheque. You know, my mum had a letter from the insurance company that went as follows: I'm really sorry to hear that you had injured your leg. I really hope that that is much better. I really hope that, you know, this will mean that you can at some point in the future go back on holiday and have a really good time with your daughter. My mum has ranted on and on and on about how this personal letter came to her and the difference that it actually made. She's told all her neighbours, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, I had a compliment slip and a cheque. Actually, to be honest with you, that's all I wanted. But the organisation that actually responded to my mum clearly worked out, went through that, took a little bit of time and responded in a personal interaction. And I think it's really important about knowing when to respond really personally and what those things are. And that's why I said to you about we're certainly seeing it challenging managing multiple customer groups with different needs. Premium service versus no frills. 28% of us still significantly happy to pay significantly more for the right customer experience. About 60% of us are interested in value, and only actually about 15% of us are interested in cheap. So these are important things. Reducing effort, really, really important to us. And the rise of the community. This is related back to trust, related back to my relationship in the wider community. So I think we are seeing a more complex customer landscape, and we're certainly seeing a more complex employee landscape. 5 different generations of people in the workforce. And that creates challenges for us about how do we motivate and drive this. Why does all of this matter? Well, for those of you that know me well will know that I bang on about this all the time. You know, customer satisfaction, customer service is not a pink and fluffy subject area. It has a bottom line impact to our businesses. And it is really important that we hold that in our minds when we have those conversations in the boardroom, and it is driven by the board. It's not, you can have the best contact centre, the best front line, but if your board do not believe and really see the benefit of the service experience, then that makes it really hard for the people that are executing it. So one of the jobs of the Institute is to help you, give you the evidence that actually demonstrates that. And here's some of it. So 80% of our GDP in the UK is generated from the service sector. Nearly 80% of the workforce in the UK are in the services sector. The next slide is particularly important. Where organisations have above average customer satisfaction over a 5 to 8 year period, above average in their sector, they have a higher profitability, EBITDA, of 10 percentage points. Okay, so all my research evidence that organisations where they place a greater focus on customer experience over the longer term, it's not an initiative, it's not something we do just for a short time, it's not something that comes in and out, it's something that's about our culture, it's the way we do things around here. But 10% higher levels of profitability and 5% higher levels of revenue, and the real killer for me, because often in some of the organisations it's not necessarily profit that is driving you, is productivity. So there's a massive link, we know this, between employee engagement and customer satisfaction. And where organisations have much higher levels of customer satisfaction, they have much higher levels of employee engagement. And actually they get higher levels of productivity, to the tune of 114% higher than when it's below average. So if you ever needed one slides to show to our boards, it's this one, guys. There is an economic imperative. The other side of this is the cost of not doing it. So again, a separate piece of research from the Institute. This is the amount of time that we're spending sorting out problems. So on average, we're spending 2.2 days a month dealing with consequences of one of our suppliers, not actually dealing with it. We're spending 2.6 days per month sorting out our own problems. Yeah, problems we've created. And 24 hours a year, I was surprised how little this was, you and I in work time sorting out our utility bills, our water company, our telcos, obviously nothing to do with our housing because you're not causing any of those issues. But on a serious note, think about that cost. That adds up to 122 billion to the UK economy. So the reason why I share this with you, there is a really big prize for focusing on the longer term customer experience and satisfaction. The other thing too is okay customer service or average customer service is not enough. Where organisations have above average are scoring 9s out of 10, they have a 50% higher level trust rating. Trust is really important, going back to what I was saying before, and reputation is also important. Richard mentioned about staying off the front page. Reputation is going to become an increasingly important aspect. We want to work for organisations that we believe do the right things. We want to work in organisations which are making a difference. And your sector makes a difference. And attracting people to work in this sector is really important. So let's have a quick look at the latest UK CSI. So who in the room thinks that customer satisfaction has increased? None of us. Oh, that's a bit depressing, isn't it? Sceptical, but maybe honest too, because you're right. Customer satisfaction in the UK is continuing to fall. Why am I worried by this? It's not a massive fall, but there's a bit of a trend going on. And I often, people ask me, why has that kind of moved? Well, when you look at that, in January 2013, it was at its highest level, and then it fell off a cliff. Why did it fall off a cliff then? Sorry. Complacency, absolutely. And also we were coming out of a recession, so we were cutting. Doing a little bit of cutting, just shaving off here, make a little bit of a change there. Takes a while, but it catches up. And when it catches up, it falls off the cliff. So that's exactly what you saw there. So we're just what's only one person here. Take out 10%, take out 5%. Won't have the systems will be able to cope with that. That's what actually happens. And then you have to drag yourself back up. And we all think, OK, we actually do need to have a bit of a focus on this. So we get back to that. And now we're starting to see it again, I think. The cost pressures, the constant, well, actually, we're putting in this system versus human development. How do we trade that off? All of those sorts of things. And we're starting to see it fall again. And there's two things, I've mentioned one of them, that really worried me. One of the biggest things that worried me in the latest UK CSI is the fact that not keeping our promises has gone up from 5% to 17%. So, we are not doing what we said we would do. And I don't believe any one of us go to work to do a rubbish job, or your colleagues do. So there's something wrong that we're not enabling our people to be able to really actually deal with this and address this. And we're also having a significant increase in the number of problems. Now, I often have a big debate with the regulators more generally about this, because I don't think number of complaints is a useful measure. Because actually, in some respects, you want to know. You would encourage people to actually complain more, because you want to know what you're trying to fix. But the reality is what we're doing is we're just doing recovery, rather than going back up the food chain and thinking, why did that keep happening? How can I fix that further up there so it doesn't happen all the time? And that can be really frustrating for all of us, can't it? Because we all do it, because we're busy. And we're busy in the moment trying to deal with the moment. And as you will know, the latest UK CSI, well, actually in January last year, we added in 3 new dimensions: emotional connection, customer ethos and ethics. And I think these will grow in importance. So the number one message is we've got to get the basics right. That's the customer experience. Don't get the customer experience right, we're not even actually on the same page. However, as we go forward, additional things like, do I feel connected to this organisation? Do I trust this organisation? And this is going to be important when we start to talk about the tech and about how you're going to use my data. Because if I don't trust you, I won't give you my data. And I'll show you some interesting stats on that. And the reputation and ethics. So who's the top performing sector? Who's really good at service? Banks, okay. Anything else? Leisure? Retail. Okay, so retail is still number one. Fell quite a bit, which is interesting. Tourism, definitely in terms of leisure up there. Banks and building societies have actually improved quite a lot, because they did fall quite a long way. And then down at the bottom, transport, utilities, public services and telcos. Utilities have fallen the most. And we're actually just finished in the field for the latest UK CSI. And if I was a betting woman, I'm not going to be betting on lots of improvement, if I was totally honest, sadly. So it'll be interesting to see when we come out with that. Top performing organisations. Who's brilliant? First Direct? Yeah. Interesting. First Direct, number one. Debenhams, that was quite unusual. That was quite unusual in terms of seeing that, and I'll come back to that. John Lewis, Next, Amazon, Nationwide. Now, the important thing, and I have this conversation a lot with the regulator, it's not for me about who is in, I don't know what I touched, there we go, who is in the top 10. It's about how often you're in the top 10. It's about consistency, guys. So there are at least 5 of those organisations that are always in the top 10. So First Direct, John Lewis, Next, Amazon, Nationwide are always in the top 10. And that's what interests me, because it's about their consistency of performance. So if I was a betting woman, don't think anyone in this room works for Debenhams, I'm not entirely sure that I would see Debenhams as high up in the next round. Yeah. Let's have a look at the sector. So how do you think the sector performs in relation to the average? Better than or worse than? Who thinks better than? Okay, you're correct. So your housing association, overall 70.6. Public services, 74, and the average, 77. Now, before we all get depressed, let's have a little look at where those differences are. Because I think there's some really interesting things that we could really focus on here, guys. And there's a big prize at the bottom of this table. So 20% of the time, getting it right first time is our biggest issue, yeah? So if we can move that dial, getting it right first time, you'll have a significant increase in terms of overall customer sat, and also the percentage of problems, so reducing the problems in the first place. Now, I'm well aware that it's very easy to say that, and that it's very challenging in our workplaces to do that. But those are the key areas for me. But I also think, going back to what I was saying to before, given the nature of what this sector does and how important this sector is, you have a huge opportunity, I think, to build much greater levels of trust and much greater connectivity. And I think connectivity is about the future, because service should never just be a transaction, guys. It's far, far more than that. It's about building your brand. It's about your ethos. It's about your culture. It isn't about getting the thing out the door faster. That's making it easy. That's a byproduct of it. It's about serving our people in the right way we possibly can. Now, we did some work in the last 12 months on Omnichannel and about data, and I've just collected a few kind of interesting, well, I felt they were interesting points that I would like to share with you. 25% of us, nearly 26% of us, are unwilling to share our data with an organisation. Who in this room has lied about their data? What did you lie about, sir?
I gave the wrong email address when I was registering.
And why did you do that?
I didn't want loads of spam.
Yeah. Wrong email address because you didn't want to be loads of spam and connected. Anybody else want to be honest about why they lied about? Telephone number. I lied about my telephone number. I also lied about my age, and that's not because of vanity. That definitely wasn't vanity. But I moved it by a month because I thought, if you lose my data, my age is really important, as in my date of birth. So I moved it out by a month. That caused me a whole host of difficulties, I can tell you, so I'm not advising you do it. But, you know, this is the kind of potty things that we do as customers. Yeah? So we are not always sharing our data. Feel an organisation knows more information. Let me give you a little example. We have a retail client. I went to see them, and I was with my client relationship director, and we sat down in the room. This is a true story, and I won't tell you who it was. I'd never met these people before. I'm a customer of these people. And the retail director said to me, now, after we'd had this little bit of a conversation, now please tell me, how do you like that scarf that you bought? Yes, big sort of kind of, and I was a bit flummoxed. I thought, my God. And I was thinking, what scarf did I, and it was just really interesting about how that made me feel in that moment. And I'm in customer service. I know what's happening with my data. I'm sharing that data. But it was really interesting about what my immediate response to that was. Luckily for me, it was a scarf and nothing more unusual, I promise you. But isn't it interesting about how did that make me feel and how you're using my data? So again, asking for some of this permission, thinking about what we're doing with it. It's not always about you making it easier. If you are actually prying, that's too much. Yeah, and we are funny about odd things. So working out that is important. Have organisations incorrect information about themselves? Yeah. Could spontaneously name an organisation they trust their data with? Only 35% of us. Who do you think they trust data with most? Yeah, banks. Banks come really high in terms of trusting use of data, and HMRC comes up very high in terms of trusting data. And that's because of the amount of encryption that we have to go through. The other company that actually people named was Amazon, which is interesting. Okay, so few organisations, this is actually offer an integrated offer in terms of omnichannel. So a lot of us talk about omnichannel, but actually really we've just got separation in terms of channel. So only 7% of organisations have a genuinely integrated experience. Organisations for whom omnichannel is a strategic focus, all of us, nearly 84%, and investing more in the omnichannel experience, 64%. Now, from a customer perspective, 41% feel negatively towards organisations that only offer an online contact option. It's quite a big number. 48% feel more negative towards organisations that require you to switch channels when they don't want to. Now, this is really interesting because how it is done is quite important. So if you can manage through, I don't necessarily mind going to a different channel if I can keep some consistency through it. But if you just suddenly say the computer says no and you've got to phone this telephone number, then I'm pretty irate about it. So how you manage the handoffs are really important through that. 56% of us feel more positive about an organisation that can offer consistent service, whichever channel they choose, it should say, rather than you choose. And most omnichannel experiences aren't driven by you or I as customers. They're not by our preference. They're by us as organisations forcing us down a route. 28% of customers said it made the experience more difficult and the issue was not resolved, lack of coordination, repeating my details, all of these handoffs and frustrations, which comes back to the getting it right first time point. So one of the key things for me is thinking about that as a customer journey, really. To the point about email, I thought this was really interesting. It depends, okay? So working out what the query is, what the issue is, I'm more inclined as a customer group to allow or be happier with certain channels than others. So by phone is still the overall preference, yeah, which is interesting. But it's a complex question because I want to have that reassurance. Do you know why I think people are emailing? Because it's an audit trail. I want proof. So, so I'll email, so I've got that, and I can say, I emailed you on this date. Definitely that's the case. But isn't it interesting in terms of the usage of various things that we're seeing? So sending info to an organisation, email's still the biggest preference. Receiving terms and conditions, that's again about having evidence on that. Immediacy, phone, want to talk to somebody. Website, when it's a simple or quick, FAQ, can I just check that? Quite happy to do that and serve myself. Advice or guidance when I'm searching or hunting, then I might want to do that. So really thinking about your customer and where they are in their journey and what they might be doing as part of that, I would argue is really important. And then challenges and enablers that are trying to really drive an omnichannel experience. I've already mentioned some of this. So understanding and engaging with your customers' preferences, not what we think they are going to be doing. Building a culture of data integrity and transparency. What are you doing with my data? How many of you have like Advantage cards, Boots Advantage cards? Yeah, I do. Interestingly, every time I buy medicine, I never use my Boots Advantage card. Why do I not do it? I am a very suspicious person. You can kind of see that, can't you? I don't do that because I'm worried at some point they will send or sell my data and then work out that I have a big penchant for fishermen's friends and seem to buy an awful lot of them. But importantly, I'm very suspicious about what you're going to do with my data. And I think that will be a growing trend. Integrating data and systems, organisational alignment. We touched on earlier about the silo aspect of this. Maintaining the human touch, I do not think that will ever go away. We still need to have the ability to make contact in a human form. And I am not a hologram. Maybe in 20, 30 years' time that would be the case. But I still believe that ultimately we need to have human interaction. Managing the needs of vulnerable customers, really big challenge in terms of where we're seeing that. So just a few slides on this, about understanding and engaging with your customers' channel preferences. How and why those customers are using that particular channel and what they're willing to accept, basically. Designing the customer experience. I know you know this, but actually it's really important, really thinking about this through the lens of the customer. It's not about doing everything the customer wants. The customer isn't always right. But thinking about that interaction, making it easy, are we really designing around that? Are we conditioned by the channel, our systems constraints, or our data constraints? Tracking the linkages and the hands-off. You know, your biggest issue as a sector is definitely not getting it right first time. That's because of the hands-off. Managing that through and plotting that would make a really big difference. Pain points and easing points. Identifying appropriate types of personalisation. I banged on enough about that. But making that experience easier. And personalisation, testing ideas. In terms of the culture of integrity and transparency, clear responsibility for the organisation's data and management, and being clear about in that and to customers what's happening with my data, who owns the data, what we're doing about that. Being clear about what customer data is required and why. Often we ask, stuff, don't use it. And actually probably one of the biggest things, whatever industry sector you've got, is unstructured data. Can't make sense of most of the data that we're collecting. It's a really, really big challenge as we move forward in terms of trying to look at that. And actually asking yourself, what are we using this data for and what does the customer really want? Culture and practice for data management, as I've said, in terms of personal objectives. Someone has to own this inside the organisation. Publishing what you're doing about data and transparency. And prioritising risk assessment around it. Developing contingency plans and also communicating. Because the bottom line is most of us know that there will be a data breach at some point. It's the reality. You're very lucky as an organisation if you have not been hacked. So thinking about how we're going to respond to that in a positive and interactive way and an honest and integrity way is something really important. How you respond is the most important thing. Integrating data and systems, I've talked about this. Organisational alignment, let's just have a look at that. Aligning around purpose, and I want to come back to purpose. For those of you that know me well, I bang on about three things: purpose, relevance and impact. Purpose being really clear. Is everybody in your organisation clear about the purpose of your organisation? Who would miss you if you were not here? It's a very salient question. I ask myself that. Who would miss the Institute if we weren't here? And am I measuring impact or am I measuring activity? These are really important for me in terms of the ways of really cutting through and being absolutely crystal clear about what we are here to deliver and sorting that out. And some of those are difficult questions, but they're important questions. Designing customer journeys around the customer's objectives, not conditioned by a channel. And let's just pause on managing the human touch. I do think, and I've said this already, that investing in developing employees' empathy, problem-solving, commercial judgment, some of the softer elements are absolutely critical. And if I asked you how much money you're spending on systems development versus how much money you're spending on people development, I think that would be quite interesting. And I might challenge that the balance isn't always as good as it needs to be. Managing the needs of vulnerable. I have a real challenge about the concept of vulnerable sometimes, if I was really honest, because I think there's a mix for me about actually some of this we should just be doing anyway. It's not necessarily about because they are vulnerable. It's this issue about making sure that we are trying to put in place things that actually really support this. But we do need to be transparent. We need to find ways, which is why the human contact is really important in terms of dealing and addressing genuinely sensitive issues, physical, mental. We've got a massive increase. One in 5 people in our workforces have mental illness challenges. And often when I talk at this type of conference, I know that the housing sector has a real challenge with this. So, there's some big issues in terms of society that are also now impacting into our world. So finally, because I know, Richard, I'm probably very bad with time over here, let's just have a quick look at things on the cultural side. Already shared this. For every 1% increase in employee engagement, you get a 0.41 increase in customer sat. Direct correlation. The top 20 things that were important to customers, the top 5 are all about people, guys. They're all about competence of staff. They're all about staff saying what they were going to do, how good they were over the phone, helpfulness, handling of the complaint, and then we get into product reliability. The importance of engaged or disengaged or passive employees. So the light green is highly engaged. The dark green is passively engaged and disengaged is the purple. For me, the most important thing is what we're doing to try and really improve the passively engaged. So passively engaged are doing a perfectly fine job, they turn up, they do their job and they leave. But they're not connected to our businesses. What I mean by that is they're not connected to the purpose. They're not really feeling, actually, you know what, I really care about all of this organisation and I live and breathe this organisation. I said something really quite challenging to my own colleagues, actually. And I remember speaking at a conference, an internal conference, and I said to our colleagues, how many of you are, or my belief is that 100% of you are actually committed to customer service? Because that's what we do. But I actually only believe about 90% of us are committed to what this organisation is doing. And when you are in a cause-related world or a cause-related organisation, it's really important that you help people to connect with the purpose of the organisation, not just the cause. Because the more that you can connect people to the purpose of the organisation, then they will drive that organisation, your organisation, of course. Does that make sense for people? And I think sometimes we miss the two, and we're a bit soft on those two. So as line managers, we need to be really clear about what we're trying to do and how we're trying to help our people to deliver that cause. Customers' perceptions, so the customer knows, you know, again, our research shows this, of employee engagement. The number of staff who took responsibility to help a problem solve away, great experience, then 82%. When that didn't happen, had a much more significant worse experience. Member of organisations spoke positively about the organisation. The member of staff went above and beyond. You know, you and I both know when a member of staff is bothered or not. Can I be bothered? Makes a massive difference. Go back to what we were saying about we're all more stressed, we're much more heightened, we're much more susceptible to anything that shows that somebody's not bothered. Counter of that is we're much more engaged when we can really feel that someone is bothered. So, what makes brilliance in terms of the service experience? Leadership commitment. So that's about providing the evidence in the boardroom about the financial viability of why service really matters. Talking in the language of the board. Insight, so using our insight, not just research. What does this really show to us? Designing the customer journey around the customer. That's not doing everything, but understanding what the customer is trying to do. Consistency, one of our biggest challenges. Yeah, it's very hard to drive a consistent service experience. Your employees, your colleagues make all of that difference. We talk about that all the time, but being really clear about what your expectations are of your colleagues. This isn't doing everything that your colleague wants. This is about really aligning and saying, how does this fit with the purpose of the organisation? What does my job mean and what have I got to do to execute it? This is not about ping-pong tables and other various things. That's not employee engagement, that's activities. Dealing with problems and complaints head-on, effective measurement, measuring what's important to customers, and trying to keep thinking about how do we drive things forward in terms of innovation and improvement. So as I've already said, for me, and this is a guiding thing that I use inside my organisation, does it fit our purpose? Are we relevant? And is this activity relevant? Because you'll have big questions about, should we put carpets down? Should we paint this? Should we deliver these other various things? How does that fit to your purpose? Be clear about whether those discussions that you're having to have are really important. How long is it appropriate before I actually do that repair? I think it is really important that if we're clear about all this, we don't get distracted then. We don't compare ourselves with other kind of areas. We focus on what we believe and what we stand for. And purpose is important because it guides our discussion, it drives our direction, it creates meaning. I want to work for an organisation that I get out of bed every day and think I absolutely believe in this organisation and the small part that I can play in delivering for this organisation. And it will influence my behaviour. So, thank you, and thank you very much. It's a bit of a cant round everything, but I'm very happy to take any questions whatsoever. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. I picked up quite a lot from that. Actually, some of those stats really jumped out. But I want to open the floor. We have time for maybe 2 questions. Anyone like to ask Joe a question about what you've just seen? Silence. I'm going to ask a question, actually, because one of the stats that jumped out at me was 7% of brands or organisations are doing omnichannel, but yet 84% say it's important and say it's part of their strategy. Why such a big gulf?
It's really hard. Really, really hard to do. And I think also we are a bit confused about what we mean by that. And I would question, why are we doing it, to be slightly controversial, but why are we doing it and why are we trying to serve it? It's a bit like having a social media policy. A lot of people say, oh, we've got to do social media. Well, only if you're going to do something with it. So I think that it is a difficult thing to do. So one of the biggest challenges is working out what your customer wants, through who you're trying to serve, why are you trying to serve them, and then how to serve them. Whereas at the moment, I think a lot of stuff is done the other way around. We're developing systems and stuff from the lens of us as organisations. And I don't know, how many people are from IT sat in this room? One.
It's one
well
IT
done.
person.
Well done, is what I'm going to say. Well done, because you've come to a customer service conference.
Well done.
That's why we're not integrating, yeah? 2.
There's 2.
3. Oh, there's more than they're admitting.
You were shy.
They're admitting now. They're
shy.
coming up now. They're admitting.
Oh, 4.
4. 4.
I missed that at the back there.
5.
Yeah.
Oh, no question.
We've got a question, yeah. We've got a microphone, actually, if you wouldn't mind, just because we're recording.
I think there's a perception that it drives cost out of the organisation, and that they start with that assumption, and really you come back to purpose. You need to get that right and the customer experience right. That will drive cost out of the organisation, not the other way around. But it's normally pressures on budgets and things like that. Oh, this is a tool we can use to do that. I think that's the wrong way around.
Yeah. And the great thing about today, because I am ancient, so when I used to work in financial services, we'd spend 25 million on a massive system change and pray that it worked, and it often didn't. Whereas now we are able to do things much more agilely and testing and doing things. But you're right. The premise should not be about we're doing this as cost saving. One of the biggest challenges I always had with the concept of some of the public sector kind of mantra about digital to save money. That's not the answer. It's digital to make a better experience. And to use digital, because there is, don't get me wrong, I think it is really important that we are utilising digital means. The point about making it easy, and making any transaction, making that easy for me is really, really important. But understanding when also I still need the human touch. But it is really, for me, and it's really good on a serious note to have tech and service people together, because that's when you start to work in that way, then you are designing the right systems for the right outcome. And that's probably one of the biggest challenges, so getting the right people in the room to design it around the customer. And the more that we can do that, the more likely we're going to get the right outcome for the customer, but also for the business.
Mm-hmm. Is anybody doing that? Yeah?
Yeah.
What are your experiences?
So our large IT projects are actually led by customer services or me as a project manager now. So they're not led, obviously IT are part of the project team, but they're not led by IT.
Do you want to just say the shorter version of that into the microphone so everybody can hear?
So we made a change that our IT projects are led by customer services or a project manager that's set outside of IT now. For that reason.
Yeah.
Cool.
Absolutely.
I'd love to have a bit more of a conversation, but we are a few minutes behind. But Joe, thank you so much. Thank you, Joe.